So thank you very much for joining us. This is EC201 Microeconomics, and today we're doing public goods, and we're also going to do externalities today. So we're going to start with externalities first, but these are two disjoint ideas. And the idea of this is these are two of the market failures we talked about last time when we did Chapter 12. So, LZ. So an externality is something you do that has a spillover benefit. It has costs or benefits that go to someone who is not party to the transaction. Now, this is a major concern of environmental economics, but it's not just environmental economics. These kind of externalities appear everywhere in health, all over the place. So in order to start, the first thing we need to do is identify the agents or economic actors. In any transaction that occurs, there's a buyer and there's a seller. Those are the two agents. Now, the buyer receives the benefit of consuming whatever good or service they're buying, and in exchange, they pay money for it. So buyers get benefits. Sellers have to bear the cost of production, but they're compensated for it when they sell the good. So sellers have costs. Now, here's the rub. If there's a benefit from consuming that goes to someone other than the buyer, or there's a cost of production that the seller isn't paying, that somebody else is paying, that can create an externality. Lots of examples. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a second to get that in your notes. If there's a benefit to someone other than the buyer and the buyer's not being compensated for it, or there's a cost to someone other than the seller and the seller's not paying for it, then there's an externality. So in terms of definitions, first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new definition, the marginal social cost, or MSC. Marginal social cost is going to be a new curve, and it reflects all the costs in the transaction. Now, the marginal private cost, MPC, and I put parentheses MC here because it's either or depending on how you label it. It's not multiplied by. Marginal private cost is the marginal cost we all know and love. All that poor marginal cost that I abused you with back in the second part of the class, oh my goodness, total cost. That's the cost the firm sees. That's marginal private cost. But what if somebody else is paying? The cost that somebody else is having to pay, that's marginal damage cost. Okay? The producing firm doesn't pay that. If the producing firm is not paying the marginal damage cost, then there's an externality. If the marginal social cost and the marginal private cost are the same, then there is no marginal damage cost and there is no externality. And as far as externalities go, negative externalities, the market is working just fine. So right now, because we're talking about the cost side, we're talking about negative externalities. So let me give you an example. I've decided the hamburgers here in this area are crap. I know. I've been to Five Guys, blah. We won't even mention McDonald's. They're not even worth it. Red Robin's okay, but honestly, they don't do a very good job anymore. They used to do better, but their quality's fallen off. I've just decided the hamburgers are garbage. So I'm going to do a new hamburger joint. Where I've decided to open my hamburger joint is I've decided to open it in Hood River, Oregon, right off I-84, about a decent enough distance away that if somebody's coming out of Portland, they're probably going to be hungry, especially if they leave in the morning. So, and the nice thing about Hood River, Oregon is there's a community college there, and college students are a great source of slave labor. Actually, not slave labor, but they're a great source of labor that I can underpay and get away with. All right. So I have my hamburger joint in Hood River, Oregon. And what I've decided I'm going to do is each day, rather than properly disposing and paying for removal of the grease and the cooking oil, I'm just going to take all that, I'm going to take it out to the Columbia River, and I'm just going to dump it into the river. What could be wrong with that, right? Okay. I want you to pause right here. Let's just pause. There are two ideas I want to disabuse you of right now. The first is, but Dr. Yoder, that's gonna cause environmental damage. Yeah, I don't really care. But why? Economists only care about it if it has a monetary value. Abstractions, if you cannot quantify them, don't count. And now there's a special version of this trying to quantify the abstractions. They're called non-market valuations. But understand, this isn't an abstraction. This isn't peace, love, puppies, or rainbows. But what about the polluting of the river? Okay, why do I care about that? But some fish may die. Okay, why do I care about that? Fishermen downstream may lose their jobs. Okay, now that's a damage. You with me? So the marginal damage cost is that the fishermen downstream would lose their jobs. Now, personally, I think the fishermen should appreciate me because I'm pre-frying their fish for them. Yeah. All right, bad joke, I know. My son's listening to me, and he's got this look on his face like, I am not amused, Dad. That was not funny. He's got the straight line, not even a token. Forget the charity chuckle. I didn't even get the charity grin, the half grin. You know, the ha ha ha. Okay, yeah. I didn't even get that. It was so bad. All right, I give up. So the fishermen losing work, losing their livelihoods. That's a damage. Now, the book gives you these wonderful graphs. I hate these graphs. They're not really good. Let me show you. I redid the graphs for you. Here's our quantity per unit of time on the x-axis, price on the y-axis. So this is normal supply-demand relationship. Here's our demand curve. Demand equals marginal private benefit equals marginal social benefit. This nomenclature right here means there is no positive externality. There's another type of externality, but that's not present here. There's no positive externality. This line is what you MPC. This would be the normal supply curve. However, it's just the marginal private costs. Marginal private costs are the costs the firm sees. But notice my hamburger joint also had some costs that were paid by the fishermen. Instead of me paying and internalizing those costs and paying for disposal, I dumped it in the river. And the fishermen are paying the cost. The additional cost is here. It's this vertical distance. And notice the marginal social cost curve here is higher than the marginal private cost curve. That shows that there's a negative externality. So the market, if you leave it alone, will go to this point. At price, P sub M is price of the market, and quantity of the market right here. However, the efficient level, where all the costs and all the benefits are taken into account, is up here at P sub E and Q sub E. So notice a negative externality will underprice the good and will overproduce the good. Remember back to chapter 4. Whenever you see over under production, you see there it is, deadweight loss. So this is the deadweight loss to the economy due to the negative externality. Now, let's talk for a minute. If the market did produce the efficient level, notice production of this would go down. It would go from Q sub M towards Q sub B. That means production comes down. Guys, that means a job. If I had to pay for the additional disposal of my cooking oil, etc., that's going to raise the price of my hamburgers, okay? And that means I'm not going to sell as many hamburgers, which means I don't need as many workers, which means somebody loses a job. Have you ever heard the argument, the EPA, which stands for Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA kills jobs, the job-killing EPA? Yeah, that's kind of what happens. That's what economics says is going to happen. It does kill those jobs. But what about the fishermen who now have their job back, that didn't have their fish destroyed or were properly compensated for the fish? They have their jobs back now. So anybody who says EPA is job killing, yeah. If it's a proper regulation, yeah. You know, that's kind of true. They got a point. But they're not seeing the whole picture. They're just seeing this little bit here. Okay. So here's the deadweight loss. Let me give you some examples. Acid rain, Clean Air Act. That's a classic example of a negative externality. So let's say we were in, I don't know, out in extreme eastern Oregon, you know, right up against the Idaho border. And let's say we had a factory, and our factory put a bunch of stuff up in the air, and this whatever we put up in the air generated acid rain. So if it came down, it would destroy stuff. If the acid rain, if the wind was blowing a certain direction, the acid rain would fall on Idaho, and it would destroy the Idaho potatoes. Okay, great. Not great as in good, but great as in we understand it. Those potatoes have a market value. We know what the damage is. We know how, and then we can figure out how we're going to do it. Maybe the Idaho potato farmers sue our factory here in Oregon, and they recover damages. But then there's this other thing. This is a map of the state of Utah. And right here is Canyonlands National Park. Right here. Now, Canyonlands National Park is divided into 3 chunks. There's the most touristy bit called Island in the Sky. That's in the northeast part of the park. Absolutely gorgeous vistas. If you want to go off-roading, you can take your 4-wheel drive and take it down off the cliffs and ride the cliff trails. Great views, absolutely a lot of fun. The southeast portion, Canyonlands National Park, is called the Needles District, where you get these spires of stone shooting up out of the earth. Amazing things. But in the western part of Canyonlands National Park is something called the maze. It's all very, very difficult to get to. I have been in the maze. Oh, I got lots of stories of the maze. But hidden in the maze of Canyonlands National, so here's Island in the Sky up here. Here's the Needles District. But over here is the maze. Now notice, here's the roads coming into Island in the Sky. Big, great roads, not a problem. Here's the roads coming into the Needles District. Lots of roads, visitors center, great. Notice there's nothing for the maze. If you're coming in off of these dirt roads, it's rough. You're roughing it really bad in the maze. hidden in the maze are the largest Native American petroglyphs anywhere in the world. It's called the Great Gallery. Now, you may not be into history, but let's be clear. If these were destroyed, we would never get them back. So if our factory in Eastern Oregon, who threw up stuff that made acid rain, what if the winds were blowing just so that it destroyed the Great Gallery? How would you do the damages there? What is this worth? Well, one speaking, not much, right? It's hidden in the maze, nobody goes to it. Part of the reason why it's so well preserved is it's in the maze. Vandals and whatnot can't really get to it that easily. But what is it worth? How do you measure the market value of that? Here's the state of Colorado. In far southwestern Colorado is Mesa Verde. If you ever get a chance to go during spring break or get a chance to go, this is worth a trip to Mesa Verde National Park. In Mesa Verde, the Native American tribes literally carved their homes out of the cliff face. And you can go to Mesa Verde and walk among their village and through their homes in Mesa Verde National Park. What if these were destroyed because of acid rain destroying it? What is the value of it? Well, if we're talking Mesa Verde National Park, you know how many people come to the national park and pay a certain amount of money to go see it every year, so we can try to backdoor to market valuation and try to say, well, this generates a certain amount of economic activity for Durango and the people of southwestern Colorado in tourism or in park admission fees, et cetera, so we can try to get an economic value. Think about being the EPA for a minute. Let's say you were going to try to regulate this and regulate it properly. Let's say you were going to try to regulate it properly. Are you really going to have a regulation that changes depending on which direction the wind's blowing? No, you can't produce today. No. Can't make anything today. The wind's blowing just so. You can't, we got to protect you. No. Okay. The wind blew, now it's just the farmers. Now you can destroy their crops as long as you pay them for it. No, wind's bad. Really? So we're going to have an army of EPA officers at every factory that says whether you can produce or not depending on which way the wind's blowing? I don't know about you, but that sounds borderline absurd. Global warming is a hotly debated issue about externalities, and I'm not going to get into externalities of global warming. The key idea is that your actions, the cost of the buyers and sellers' actions, there's a cost to it that the producers aren't paying. And I'm recording this in 2020, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And a colleague of mine at the University of Colorado, Denver, and the National Bureau of Economic Research have come up with something interesting that happened during this pandemic that shows externalities in a non-environmental way. So in the state of South Dakota, every year they hold this rally in a town called Sturgis. It's a motorcycle rally. All the bikers come in. It's a lot of fun, carnival atmosphere, lots to do in Sturgis. And they held the rally in 2020. The economic benefits of this rally, the people who drove to the rally got some benefits. The economic benefits to the town are very clear. Lots of money spent in that town. Lots of economic activity in South Dakota. Well, let's be honest, in South Dakota, they need it. They live in South Dakota. What are they going to do? Drive over to Rushmore and stare at the faces for a while? And I mean, good time in South Dakota. Hey, let's go look at some stone carvings. Okay. However, there was a pandemic, and people did get sick at Sturgis. They didn't know it. And they went back to their home states, and we've been able to trace them. And we've been able to find about how much the cost of Sturgis was. Each of these states that these people came in, if you add it together, $12.2 billion of public health cost has been so far spent dealing with the people who went getting sick, but then their families and their friends who were neither buyer nor seller. They did not go to Sturgis. They did not make the purchase decision to go to Sturgis to do this, and they did not receive any benefits of it. They got sick. They're bearing an externality, and the state in which they live, in many cases, is having to pay public health costs to try to deal with them getting COVID. So the benefits went to South Dakota, but every other state in the country has to pay. I mean, honestly, it was funny. One paper concluded that you could actually pay every Sturgis person $20,000 to just not go to Sturgis, and you would have been economically better off than them going. Just hand them a $20,000 check and say, please don't go to Sturgis. And it would have been less economic damage than having that motorcycle rally. That's a negative externality. That's a negative externality. But it's not just one type of externality. There's also positive externalities. So at this point, if we were in class together, I would be walking up to some poor person sitting in the front row, and I would look at that poor person. I said, I'm about to get really close to you. I'm sorry. And I'd stand really, really close to them. And I would look at them, and I would say, at this moment right now, you are receiving a positive externality. And no, it's not from my radiant glow and minty fresh scent. No. Although you could argue that, but no. Okay, I got a charity head shaking no going, Dad, you're crazy. All right, well, all right. Ooh, a half grin. I guess I'm getting better. Anyway, no. Whenever you travel, you carry a passport with you. But especially if you're traveling fun places, you have to keep a yellow card with you. Now, this yellow card is an international vaccination record. If you do not have certain vaccinations, the country you're trying to get into can hold you in quarantine for certain lengths of time without that record. So I've had 3 filled yellow cards. I've had so many vaccinations. I'm convinced I'm going to live forever because I'm that well preserved. But I want you to think about it. The student next to me in class is not getting sick because I've had a vaccination. But when I made the decision to get my vaccination or not, I didn't care about his or her, him or her. I cared about me. I made the decision so that I didn't get sick. It's not, I'm getting this vaccination so everybody around me doesn't get sick. No. It's about me. So here's a new graph. Again, quantity per unit of time and price. Notice here the supply equals marginal private cost equals marginal social cost. There's no negative externality. Here's marginal private benefit. This is the benefit for me getting the vaccination. But the student sitting next to me doesn't get sick. They're getting the benefit of the vaccination as well. And if you add everybody I come into contact, all their benefits too, you get a marginal social benefit curve. Notice what happens. The market price would be here, market quantity would be here. But the efficient price would be all the way up here, and the efficient quantity would be over here. Hence, the market would underprice and underproduce the efficient level. So look at this area right here. Now, I know my demand is in this area. I buy a lot of vaccinations, right? But what about these people? The cost to them, which is here, exceeds the benefit to them, but not the benefit to everybody if they all paid in. So at this point, I would look at the student in class and I'd say, would you be willing to give me a penny, to pay an extra penny to not get sick for me to get the vaccination? Would that be worth ponying up a penny? Would you be willing to throw a penny in? How many of you in this class would be willing to throw in a penny so that you didn't get sick from your professor? And usually a few hands go up, and I'd say stop and look. That means there's a market value here. That means there's a positive externality. So these units on this part of the demand curve, they're not going to get vaccinated because they're only internalizing their personal benefits. But if they internalized all of society's benefit up here, they would have consumed it. Just like on the negative externality, now we have an underproduction dead weight loss. There's benefit to society that isn't realized because people got rationed out or decided not to get the vaccination because they were not compensated for everything else. This is why vaccinations, think your flu vaccine in the United States, is subsidized by public health authorities. What does it do? The government pays some of this, and it lowers the price of production, shifting the supply curve down to try to get down to this point. Now, the best place is where marginal social cost equals marginal social benefit. At that quantity of production, that's the optimal. Now, I want you to stop here, and I need to disabuse you of something. Years ago, in the 90s, there was this cartoon. It was a popular cartoon. Some of you may have seen it. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's rather cheesy. You're welcome to look at it on, I think it's on Netflix. I'm sure it's on YouTube, but it was called Captain Planet. Go Planet, right? And the theme song goes, Captain Planet, he's our hero, gonna bring pollution down to zero. That's not what we're talking about here. The optimal level for economists of pollution is not zero, because the pollution generates stuff that people need, want, and has value. All the economists are saying is the benefits of polluting should be greater or equal to the costs. If the costs of doing it are bigger, then there's a loss in efficiency. Now, in this world, we can talk about what the real costs are. We can have a real discussion about that. Wait a minute, the costs of the loss of the Great Gallery at Canyonlands National Park or Mesa Verde, those are immeasurable because you've lost it for all time and we can never replace it. And we can have that discussion. That's a legitimate discussion, okay? We're not diminishing that. I remember I was in Maine. And when you live in the state of Maine, the wind normally blows, the air normally blows out of Canada. And it's crisp air, maybe a little cold for some people. It never bothered me. You know, Elsa and I get on great. Cold never bothered me anyway. But for some people, it really does bother them. However, sometimes the air came up out of the Ohio River Valley, came out of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, upstate New York, the industrial heartland. And when the wind came up, my eyes, I could tell because my eyes would burn from the pollution in the air. I mean, it was bad. Kids would have asthma. Everything would be horrible. It got so bad frequently, maybe not every year, but quite frequently. New England states, the Northeast, would sue Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, etc., for damages. Why? Because some of the kids who needed inhalers that was triggered by the pollution from those states were getting their medical bills paid for by the government and by the taxpayer. So the state was suing to recover that money. Not we dislike you, we're angry, it's just, hey, we're having to pay the bills here. We're paying this bill because of you. Would you mind giving us some money so that we can pay our bills because we didn't choose to make the stuff and we're not buying your stuff, so why are we having to deal with you? Just because we live downwind from you doesn't mean we should have to suffer. And some of you are going like, dude, that's what we do. We live downwind from those guys that live over there. That's out. No, just stop. Yeah, I know you may have smelly neighbors or friends, but in your case of friends, you did choose them. But we're not talking about zero pollution. We're talking about the benefits being greater than or equal to the costs. So what do? We got externalities. How do you fix them? Well, there's not one way, and there's not a perfectly good way either. There's discussion about this. So the first is private bargaining and negotiation. It's called a co-solution. We'll talk about that. Where it says environmental standards. These are quantity tools. The next one here, taxes and subsidies. These are called Pigouvian taxes. These are special. After Professor A.C. Pigou. We'll talk about those in a sec. And then sale or auctioning of rights. So we'll go through these individually. The key idea here is we're trying to get internalization. For every solution, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the buyer and or the seller to internalize the costs and benefits to other people, to make them think that it's a benefit to them or a cost to them. If you can do that, then those buyers and sellers are going to act naturally in the marketplace to get you to the right place. If you can't, then you're going to have an issue. So the first idea is COS. So here's how COS works. Let me put this way. I am allergic to American cigarettes, and it can be bad. It can be pretty bad. One of my kids is too. And I'm an economist, which is a polite way of saying I'm cheap. Very cheap. So right now I live on a second floor apartment. And during the summer months when it gets really hot, what do? Well, at night I would open the windows, let the air blow through the apartment. Works great, plenty of fans, everything's great. Then as the sun comes up, I would shut the windows, put reflections down, make sure that there was no sunlight getting in, and it would keep the inside about 15 to 20 degrees cooler than the outside in the heat of the day. And then when the heat broke, pull everything down, open the windows, vent it out. Now, I live on the second floor. So I've got this little balcony outside my living room area. Beneath me, when we first moved in was this elderly couple. Now, the guy was okay. I'd help him carry in appliances. He had a little truck that he would buy things and move. They moved up here from California. He was all right. His wife, however, how do I put it this way? She was a skeleton with skin. Okay? She looked like death warmed over. She was a skeleton with skin. She didn't walk as much as she kind of hobbled very slowly. Now, his wife had, as best I can tell, one joy in life. They went out and bought a bunch of bird feeders, put a bunch of these things outside their little patio area. She would go outside. She would sit down in a very comfortable chair, and she would smoke. Now, in the mornings when I would go and seal up, I would walk out onto my patio, and I have these little, it's 2x4s, and there's this little crack in between each of the 2x4s so I can see down. And I would look down, and I would notice, first thing in the morning, all the cigarette butts were out of the ashtray, everything was gone. Then one day I looked after they had smoked for a day. Dude, a pack-a-day smokers would be a cut for this lady. She's going on 2 to 3 packs a day. I mean, seriously, the lady's a chimney, just cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. Now, the problem with this is very simple. 2 of us are allergic. It's actually so bad with me when I travel. You know, when you go to hotels and they say, oh, by the way, if you smoke in a non-smoking room, you have to pay this cleaning fee. Yeah, they try to clean the room. No, I can still detect it. And if I stay in that room, you are taking me out in a stretcher. My eyes will swell shut, my throat will start to swell, and breathing becomes a real big challenge. At night, ironically, when I most want to air out my apartment, that's also the prime time for her to smoke. She'd love to sit out there right after the heat broke and just smoke like a chimney. And what happened? My apartment became a low-pressure zone. And it sucked the smoke through my back door and went straight into my apartment. It got so bad, we actually had a thing. One of us would go, smoke! And we'd all run and shut the door, slam the door shut. It was kind of a little passive-aggressive thing a little bit. If I shut the door really loudly, they heard smoke and we shut, then maybe no, totally, they never got the hint. They didn't give a shit. Right? So under coast, what could you do? Well, go down to my neighbors. Go down the stairs. And I knock on their door. Neighbor, neighbor, neighbor. Right? Door opens. There's the guy. Oh, hi. Good to see you. How are things going? How's the miss? Oh, wow. You look great. I look at her. It's like, yeah, you look great. You totally look like you're about to die. You look wonderful. How great. Look at the guy. So, tell you what. Here's a check. I will pay you this amount of money every month if you agree not to smoke between these hours in the evening and these hours in the morning. They had the right to pollute. They had the right. It was their balcony. There was no non-smoking ordinance. There was no legal barrier. There was nothing there. They had every right. I bought the rights. Okay, I'll give you this amount of money every month. Now, the amount of money was cheaper than buying an air conditioner because I'm cheap. Remember, I'm an economist. Cheaper than that and cheaper than the additional electricity bill. That's a coast solution. Now, in order for a coast solution to work, number one, there can be no impediment. Shortly thereafter, when Oregon partly legalized recreational marijuana, the landlord where I lived said, we're not going to allow smoking at all in the apartment complex. We're going to have a smoking area over here. You can stand out on the road and smoke, but you're not smoking in the unit or on the premises. So there can be no legal impediment. Second thing is the assignment of rights has to be clear to both parties. What that means is I had to buy the right to smoke from them to stop it. Now, the rule at the apartment complex was everybody could smoke, but they had to get the permission of everybody around them. Then I would have the right to deny them. They would have to pay me for the right to smoke. But in this case, they had the rights. I had to buy the rights from them. If you don't have clear assignment of rights, then you go to court to sort that out. And lastly, the number of people you're negotiating with has to be few. If I had to go around to every single person in the apartment complex and pay them, I couldn't do that. That'd be prohibitive. For those of you who want an example of that breaking down, there's a movie called Waking Ned Divine. Fair warning, there is nudity in the movie, and equal fair warning, it's not the good kind. If there is good kind, but it's not the good kind. It's the kind you can't unsee. But in the movie, there's a collective action problem where one holds out. And that's the issue there. Now, in the case of my earlier example of the hamburger joint, if the fisherman found out it was me, they could sue me for damages, right? Because I damaged their business. You could use liability laws to try to stop it. But that's still, in a way, the government getting involved. And it costs a lot of money to do a lawsuit. It costs a lot of money to prove it in a court, et cetera. But sometimes private bargaining and negotiation, you can get to a coast solution. Sometimes you can't. The next is environmental standards. This is a quantity solution. This is the government saying, thou shalt not produce more than U star. So here's the graph. I'm going to draw on it for a second. Now, let's assume for a moment, we really know what the damages are. Okay? We don't have a what is the value of Mesa Verde problem? How do we guess, or the Great Gallery? How do we measure what the real value of this is? Or what is the value of this, the economic value of loss of an animal going extinct? We don't have that. We actually know what the value is. And let's say we know what the efficient level is, and we pass a law or a regulation that says thou shalt only produce, and I'm drawing a red line here, trying to draw it straight. Not bad, not bad, not bad, not bad. It's not the worst I've done. Okay, there you go. You can only produce that much. You got me? And that's written into the laws, into the regulations. What happens if the demand curve shifts here, or if the demand curve for this good shifts here? Well, if in this case, if the demand curve shifted right, you're now underproducing. You've just put into law a deadweight loss, an underproduction deadweight loss, and even though society valued it and it would make sense to do it, it's not happening. Or over here, the efficient level is down there. Now you're allowing the market to just go amok. Now you may as well not have a regulation at that stage. The challenge with environmental standards, with quantity regulations, guys, even if you can measure it all correctly, which is a big if, even if you can measure it all correctly, is it's not market reactive. Now, if we're talking about something like the environmental standards of how much arsenic or lead should be in your drinking water, yeah, I have no problem with that being effectively zero. But in general, environmental standards are not market reactive. Okay? taxes and subsidies. These are Pigouvian taxes named after Professor A.C. Pigou. The idea of a Pigouvian tax goes something like this. You measure the damage. You know what the damages are. You tax the producer, the firm that's producing the good, for the amount. So if we had that factory in Eastern Oregon and we did damage to Idaho potatoes, we find out how much damage that is, we get the economic value, and we tax the producer for that amount. You then take the money from the tax and you compensate the person. You know, there's a special potato installation event, or you find ways to compensate them economically that makes it so that they're no longer damaged. What happens is the tax, the producer sees the tax, factors it in as part of their costs, they get to the efficient level, and the damages get compensated to the person who's being damaged. That's the negative externality of the tax. The positive externality version is you subsidize the production. You basically tax the person who's getting the extra benefit and use it to subsidize the purchase of people. That's why we have public health. Basically, all of our tax money goes to funding flu vaccines and then right now COVID vaccines, right? It subsidizes the benefits. Now, here we go. Biggest problem with using Pigouvian taxes and subsidies is you have to measure the damage in financial terms. And that's the real key. That's one real key. How do you measure the damage of the Great Gallery? I'll be honest with you. I'm a museum nerd. Okay, I love going to museums. I love going to art galleries. I love culture. I love going to, you know, the World Heritage sites. I love going, learning about cultures. The loss of them would be tragic for me. Would I be willing to pay $10 if I knew that they would be preserved for the next 10 generations? Yes, I would. That's trying to get at what we call a non-market valuation. But notice what happens here. Okay? Notice what happens here. What if we got this wrong? So if we think the damages are this much, you would tax that amount. But what if you estimate the damages way up here? You could generate a bigger dead weight loss. Remember, this is an overproduction dead weight loss here. But if you get the measurement of the damages wrong, you could generate a bigger underproduction dead weight loss than you can an overproduction dead weight loss. Guys, the cure can be worse than the disease. It is possible. Measuring these things is incredibly, incredibly hard. Incredibly hard. The last is selling and auctioning of rights. So the idea of this is it's a combination of quantity and price tools. So imagine we have, let's say we have two plants that are producing the same thing. One is polluting, the other is not. That's me. So the government figures out, okay, this year we think that this is the maximum amount of pollution. We think that this is the efficient level, and they set the limit there. And then they take permits, and they give every firm a certain number of permits. So I get a permit, you get a permit, everybody gets a permit. If your firm is heavily polluting, you're going to need more permits. You're not going to have enough. So you're going to have to buy them. And in my case, if I had already paid the price to produce cleanly, I don't need my permits, so I can sell them to them. What that does is that creates a price wedge. The cost and price of the permit is the cost. It creates this price wedge that can be used to develop, remediation technologies. What, Professor Yoder, remediation technologies? What does that mean? Remediation technologies means if a heavy polluter could buy this technology to become clean, then that's a remediation technology. So if the technology costs less than the permits every year, they're going to buy the technology and they're going to get clean. If it's cheaper to buy the permits, they're just going to buy the permits. That's the idea. So now, if an innovator or an entrepreneur can create the technology and make it less than the cost of the permits, they're going to be rich because all the firms are going to buy those. This is called cap and trade. Now, the argument some people have against cap and trade is, well, what if environmentalists come in and buy up all the permits and raise the cost and shut down the dirty polluters? First of all, how rich do you think these guys are? That they can do that year after year after year? I mean, who? But secondly, all that means is that the price of the permits goes up, that there's more money for innovation, because the higher the cost of the permit, the more money an entrepreneur can make by mitigating it, right? So that just throws fuel on the innovation fire for somebody to innovate and to make new. And if you wanted, you could even subsidize the new technology for the firm to lower the cost for them even further. But that's the idea of cap and trade, of these selling and auctioning of pollution rights, tradable permits. Let's be clear. In terms of externalities, there's not one perfect solution. For those of you who are going on and are going to be taking classes and take classes at Western, I do an environmental economics class where we go through these, and one of the projects in that class is we go through each of these with a fine-tooth comb, and then I talk to you not just about the policy of the economics, but we also do the policy and kind of the political aspect of it is, from a different point of view, what does this look like? What about this? What about this? Why would you use this one over this one? When does the economic efficiency argument become less responsive and more about this? What other values can mix into this that make you want to use something, a different tool that may be less effective? Okay. So there's a lot in here. I'm just giving you a highlighted difference on this. All right. So draw your line in your notes. I know that was a lot. We're going to switch gears. We're done with externalities now. Now we're going to go to public goods. So just draw a line in your notes. Take a second, deep breath. Moment of Zen. Let the kind of purge your thoughts. Here we go. When we talk about goods, when we talk about things, stuff we buy, there are two main dimensions. The first is rivalrous versus non-rivalrous. Now, right here, I have in my hand a glass and I have a caffeinated beverage of choice in it. As I consume this, hold on a second. That was nice. As I consume that, the act of my consuming it prevents you from consuming the same good, right? My consuming it means you can't. That's a rivalrous good. My beverage right here, there you go, classic example. But a non-rivalrous good would be like if we went to the movies together. You're looking at the movie screen, watching that movie does not preclude me from sitting next to you and watching the exact same movie and consuming it at exactly the same moment. That's non-rivalrous. Then you have this dimension, excludable versus non-excludable. Excludability is the ability at a reasonable cost to prevent somebody from consuming it. So If you were talking about a can of soda, you could put a vending machine in there, and that can prevent people from consuming soda. Now, what's not excludable? Well, fishing. Are you really going to be able to stop people from fishing? Are you going to have game wardens and forest rangers or Texas Rangers or Northwoods Law, Maine wardens running around on every single, are you really going to be able to do that fully? No. Have to have forget a small army, you're going to have a large army for a state the size of Oregon. You can't really properly exclude it. Now, a public good is when you get both dimensions, non-rivalrous and non-excludable at the same time. So, free-to-air television, national defense. My favorite public good is fire protection. So I mentioned before, I live on the second floor of an apartment. What if fire protection, having the fire department come out, what if that was a private good? What if they tried to make it excludable? So if you didn't pay it, it didn't come. What if the family that lives underneath me right now, what if they decide not to pay for it, right? Their apartment's going up in flames, it's burning, they're all standing out on the sidewalk watching their stuff burn. Fire brigade pulls up, right? The fire trucks pulls up, right? They get the hoses, they have the hoses locked and loaded, ready to go, and they do nothing. Why? Because my stuff hasn't caught on fire yet. My neighbor didn't pay for fire protection. It's going to burn to the ground. Dude, I live on top of them. Well, once theirs goes up, mine's going to go up too. It's not like you're going to be able to stop it if you let theirs go. So notice I can't exclude them. If my stuff goes up, theirs goes up as well. Or if theirs goes up, mine goes up. So now I can't exclude them. They get to get it for free. Now they're free riding. They don't have to pay for it because I did. So now I'm paying the cost for the entire service if I want it. I'm not just having to pay for my benefit. I got to pay for the benefits for everybody. That's the problem with the public good. You tend to have a free rider problem. So they're non-rival in consumption and their benefits are non-excludable. Non-rival, if one person enjoys it, it doesn't interfere with another person doing it. Years ago, back in the 90s, early 2000s, we used to listen to music on these things called cassette tapes, and afterwards we had these things called CDs, compact discs. Some of you would be like, yeah, I remember those old things. They still sell them occasionally. So what happened? Computer technology caught up, and we had MP3 players, and people used to take these CDs, put it in their computer, scan it, and listen to their music. Okay? You go over to your friends, you're at a party, hey, that's a cool song, what is it? Oh, it's blah, 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 blah. Hey, can I, let me go get it? And they're like, yeah, don't worry about it. Here, let me send it to you. And they sent the music file. It's non-rival. They're listening to the music, doesn't preclude you from listening to the music. It's not like the industry could reasonably stop them. Music industry started trying to figure out who was sharing, and college students were getting sued for $20, $30, $100,000 each for sharing their music. In that case, the music industry said, yeah, we can't stop you reasonably, but we're going to try to use the court laws and the copyright laws to try to stop you. And really what slowed that down didn't really stop it. But what slowed it down was Netflix, or not Netflix, Apple and iTunes, because about that time the Apple iPod came out in the music store where you could buy songs for 99 cents. And the consensus was if you didn't have to pay for the entire CD, if you could just buy the song for 99 cents that you wanted and get a legal copy of it, then people would do that. And that's kind of what ended up happening, more or less. Here's an example. So every year in Independence, Oregon, they have a big, big fireworks show. And they fund the show. You have to pay a certain amount of money to go down to the riverfront where you can set up shop. And, you know, they have some food trucks and other things there. It's kind of fun. But if you stood up at the road, your looking at the fireworks doesn't stop me from looking at the fireworks. And there's not somebody running around going, no, no, you can't look at this. You can't look at these fireworks. You didn't pay for them. Wait, seriously? So fireworks are an example of a public good. Public goods suffer from free rider problems. But here's the thing with public goods. Private goods have a horizontal sum for their demand curve. We did this back in Chapter 3. At a price of $3, family A consumes 2, family B consumes 9. You add them together, the market is 11. It's a horizontal sum. Public goods, because of their non-rivalrous feature, have a vertical sum. The first unit gives family A $3 of benefit. First unit gives family B $3 of benefit, family A $6 of benefit, which means it's economically efficient. If it costs $9 to produce, the demand curve, it makes sense to do. So the demand curve is a vertical sum. The problem is we almost never get there. Notice on this graph, here's the marginal cost curve. Society should produce units X1, but this graph will only get to this point where it crosses A, and A is going to pay for it. So think of this like the fireworks show in Kaiser for the volcanoes, right? Yeah, they get a small little fireworks show, but it still is worth more in this case to the rest of society to have a bigger show and more people to come see it, etc. So the optimal provision for public goods is actually very difficult to get to. Every society has to figure out how many public goods do you want. And there are differences in preferences. And the government has to know what it can't possibly know, everyone's preferences. And this is where you get to the Thibault hypothesis, 1956, Charles Thibault. And the idea goes something like this. If you have a relatively free society, people vote with their feet. You guys heard about Josephine County, Oregon? In Josephine County, that's in southern Oregon, there's been multiple times there have been measures, ballot measures in Josephine County to increase a small tax in the county to pay for police protection 24 hours. Because right now, you only get about 8 to 12 hours of police protection in Josephine County. If something else happens in Josephine County outside of that, they got to send state troopers from Medford or Roseburg down into Josephine County to do it. It can take 2 to 4 hours for a trooper to get to you. They don't want the protection. They'd rather have lower taxes. So in Josephine County, they keep voting no on having police protection. They want low levels of public goods. By contrast, look at Portland. They have an arts tax, or this tax, or that. They have high levels of public good provision. Years ago, I lived in the state of Maine. And Maine is the #1 highest tax state in the country, bar none. You got an income tax, you got a sales, oh God, the income tax. I used to pay more in state income taxes than I did in federal. Not even close. You have an income tax, you have sales tax, you have property taxes. Craziness. Oh my goodness. I never cared. I never minded, every year I never minded writing my check to the state of Maine. Why? When my son was born, I was a new parent. Let's be clear. I was a complete idiot. Yeah, I know I'm still suspect, but okay. I didn't know how to change a diaper. I didn't know how to swaddle a baby. I didn't know how to do anything. The state of Maine paid for somebody to come as often as we need to show me how to be a better father, how to change the diapers, how to swaddle the baby, how to burp a baby, what this means. And if something was happening that I didn't understand, I could call and they would come out and look after us. This wasn't a means test. If you're rich, you get that. No, it just happened. And they did diagnostic testing when my son was developing a speech impediment. They diagnosed it and got him speech therapy lessons automatically. It's not, oh, does your insurance cover this or that? No, it just happened. They just took care of my kid. You know how when you have back to school season and you get your shopping list of all the school supplies you need? Yeah, that's not a thing either. When you show up to school, where I lived in Maine, they gave you the supplies. They were paid for. 100%. You got what you needed. You didn't have to, these school supply drives for each children. It's not a thing. Every child automatically got what they needed the second they showed up to school. I believe in 7th grade, it was either 7th or 9th grade, you were issued a laptop in the state of Maine. Every kid was issued a laptop. And if they graduated, they got to keep it. I never minded paying my state of Maine taxes. Never minded a bit. If you want that level of public good provisions, fine, go to Maine. If you want less, there are other states that have less. New Hampshire's real close to Maine. They have lower public good provisions. If you want less in Oregon, there's counties in Oregon that are less, or you could go to Idaho or Nevada or different places that have lower public good provisions. The idea of the Tebow hypothesis is people vote with their feet, depending on what they want. If you live in Oregon and want high public good provision, go to Portland. If you want low to no public good provision, go to Josephine County. If you want something in the middle, go somewhere in the middle. Now, there's a special type of resources called common goods. These are rivalrous but non-excludable. For those of you who are interested in jobs, because remember, you're going to college to get a job, there are a lot of jobs here in common resource. There are economists that help figure out the fish stocks, the timber permits, these kind of things that really help the country and the economy of Oregon get the most economic value for everything involved. A fishery is a good example of this. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening. Next time we're going to start imperfect competition. We're going to do 3 chapters of that. So we'll talk to you later. If you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call or stop by on office hours. Have a good day.